Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another video. Thanks so much for joining me in another episode. Now this video is going to be very special, guys, because we're going to tackle a very tough and challenging topic, but might I add, a very important topic. And I'm going to make it easy for you to understand because it is so critical to understand this. And what are we talking about? Well, we're going to talk all about networking. As you guys continue to watch my channel, whether you're looking at the Linux series or whether you're looking at regular tech videos, and of course links will be in the description, but in those videos, everything that we're using is some type of device that has to talk to another device. And to be honest with you guys, without networking, all of these devices don't really mean anything. They don't do any meaningful work. It's kind of like, for example, whenever I talk to folks in corporate America and they have an awesome idea, but if they never really share the idea with anybody, it kind of doesn't really matter. Same thing goes with marketing. If you have a phenomenal product, but nobody knows about it, doesn't really matter. And same thing in the tech world. If you have this awesome device, let's say, for example, as I pull up this device here, this Samsung phone, if I have this Samsung phone in my hand, what good is it if I can't communicate with anybody in the world or I can't exchange any data? So as you move along in your Linux journey with my playlist or you're watching any of my other tech videos, it is so crucial to understand networking so that way you can see what's happening behind the scene. So that way you know how to troubleshoot, or more importantly, learn this critical skill. Because as I mentioned before, if we can't share information with each other, the information is useless. And it's the same that goes with these electronic devices. Now, the world is full of electronic devices that have to communicate with each other. And if you don't believe me, let's take a walk around my house and let me show you how important it is to understand networking. So guys, whether you know it or not, this thermostat that I have here on my wall, it actually controls the HVAC unit, which is for heating and cooling in the house. And of course, it is controlled by this thermostat that sits here waiting to receive commands from another device, which is typically a mobile device. And so this is connected to the internet, and that device needs to be able to communicate. So it's as simple as basically launching the ecobee app, and you can see what temperature my home is set to, and you can actually adjust that in real time. So if I say to myself, you know what, I want to set this at 71 instead of 72, I can go ahead and adjust it on the application. And you can see that it goes ahead and it talks to the thermostat and it adjusts now to 71. And then it goes ahead and cools the house to that temperature. In order to get that job done, this thermostat needs to talk over the internet. How cool is that? So moving along, guys, as we take a look at our home and what other devices that we have that talk and connect to the internet. And of course, most people have this in their homes, but we do have a PlayStation 4 right over here in case you want to play video games. That has to connect to the internet in order to, of course, to download games. Same thing with the Nintendo Switch over here. So of course you have the Nintendo Switch in order to be able to communicate and download games off the internet or play with others online. You of course have the TV here, and in order to be able to watch TV, we have streaming services. So if you have Netflix, Hulu, the like, of course you need to be able to communicate in order to watch your shows. Same thing with YouTube TV. In order to watch TV, you have to be able to communicate over the internet. So as you just saw, even a vacuum cleaner and a mop all in one is a device, specifically a robot, but that has to communicate with another device over the internet in order to be told what to do, which is, of course, clean my floors. And that is another example of a device that needs to communicate over the internet. So you're starting to see how important this networking stuff really is. So we are in one of the kids' bedroom right now, and of course, we have another TV and it's wirelessly connected and it communicates over the internet in order to get its content. Another example of another device in the home that needs to be able to communicate. Now, if you're wondering what this device right next to me is, let me put something up on the screen here for you, and you can see this is actually an air purifier. Now, of course, you're actually seeing live data right now from this air purifier. And if you're wondering how you can control this device, well, let me show you something. So if I use my mobile device and I click hi, clearly you can see that the fan spins and it starts doing what it needs to do in order to purify the air. Let's bring this back to auto again. And just like that, it automatically adjusts because we don't need the fan on high because, of course, the air is really good. So as you start to see, it's very important to be able to communicate with devices over the internet. So as you're living life and you are doing your business day in, day out, these devices help make life that much easier and a little bit more comfortable. And again, as I mentioned before, they need to be able to communicate. And now you're seeing how important networking is, because without it, none of this stuff can happen. Let's head back to the office and talk a little bit more about that. Now that you have seen some of the devices in my home that need to be able to communicate, I hope you guys don't judge me on how many electronics we have. Now, I didn't show you all of them, but it goes to show how important networking is, but also as well too, how much we've grown throughout the years in devices that need to be networked, meaning that they need to exchange information. When I was growing up, you probably only had 1 or 2 devices that communicated over the internet. Now that you've seen some of the devices that we have in our home, and I'm sure you have some that are similar, the next question is, well, how do they communicate with each other, and how does data get from one device over to the next device? In order to understand how networking works, I like to equate it to an analogy, and the analogy that I always use is the post office. In order to illustrate how networking works, and especially using the analogy of post office, I actually have a couple of things here. And of course, we have an envelope in one hand, and in the other hand, we have a blank piece of paper. Now, if you're wondering how this envelope and this blank sheet of paper, along with the post office, has anything to do with networking, let's talk about it. Now, let's say I have a friend, and that friend is named Sam. And Sam lives in California, and I am, of course, over here in Florida. So I want to write Sam a letter. So I'll take a quick second in order to write Sam a letter. In the letter, I'll say, "Hi, Sam, comma, how are you doing? Hopefully things are well with you." So here I wrote a quick little letter for Sam who's out in California. And so how does this letter that I have here go out to Sam all the way in California? Now guys, don't make fun of my handwriting. Again, I'm an engineer and we type all day, so clearly calligraphy is not my strong suit. So now that we wrote our letter and it has to go out to Sam, the letter, or the contents of the letter, is actually the data that we need to communicate over to Sam. And again, it's the message that we need to send over to Sam. And in this case, we're asking him how we're doing. So now that we have the letter or the data that we want to send over to Sam, that has to be put now into the envelope, which will carry the message over to Sam out in California. And we are here again in Florida. So now that we have the data in our hands, I'm going to go ahead and fold it. Now that I folded this letter, I can go ahead and put it inside of the envelope. So now that the message or the data is inside of this envelope, we call this now a packet in the networking world. Or when we think back to our analogy, which is a post office, this is now an envelope with the letter inside. And again, the letter contains the message. Or in the computer world, this packet contains the data inside of it. So again, packet is the encapsulated message. The data that's inside of it is the letter. So hopefully you're seeing that analogy there. So now that we have this packet which contains our message or our data, and now back to our post office analogy, how do we get this message from my house here in Florida over to California where Sam lives? And so the next step here is we have to address this letter over to Sam in California. So let's go ahead and do that. So here in the United States, as you all know, top left of any letter that you send in the post office, you have the from section. And the from section, of course, includes your street number, followed by street name. So once you have the number and you have the street name, under it you have what's called the city, followed by the state, followed by the zip code, of course. And in the top left, that is your from section. Now in the middle of the letter, you go ahead and you put the to section, where it's going to. And by the way, this is going to Sam. So this is going to be addressed to Sam, and it's going to be Sam's street number is going to be under it, followed by Sam's street address, or street name is another way to think about it. And then under all that, of course, you have the city, you have the state, which is going to be California, and then of course followed by the zip code. And the zip code, of course, is in California. And now that we fully addressed this message, we can actually put it in the post office now, and it can be delivered over to Sam in California. And the fact that we put an address on this letter is very similar in the networking world, where again, we talked about we had a message, which was the letter that's inside of this envelope. We have it encapsulated, which is the letter is inside of this envelope here, or in the technology world and networking world, you have now what's called a packet. And then the packet has to get addressed somehow. And you have a to and from inside of the packet. And typically you'll hear what's called a header. And the header is nothing more that contains information about who the sender is and who it is addressed to, similar to what we have over here. Now there's a lot of other information that's in there, but again, for simplicity's sake, let's just focus on who it's addressed to and of course, who it's coming from. Now in the technology world, especially in networking, the addresses are not like this exactly. Packets are sent to other computers and their address has to do with IP addressing. And in another video, we'll go into depth of what IP addressing is and how we figure that out. So now that this letter is ready to go out to Sam over out in California, we can put it in the mailbox and it will start its journey all the way from Florida to California. So let's talk a little bit about how that happens. So you went to the post office, you took your letter, you put it inside of the mailbox, and of course you put a stamp on it so that way you pay in order to make sure that your letter can get to California and reach Sam. The next thing that happens, and people a lot of times don't know this, is you have your local post offices in the area. And as an example, there can be a local post office in each city. So as an example, Orlando can have a post office. The city of Ocala can have a post office. City of Winter Garden can have a post office. The list goes on. And of course, those cities are all within the state of Florida. Now keep in mind, I'm gonna oversimplify this in hopes to not complicate it. But if you don't know, cities are all within a certain county. And of course, the state of Florida, and not only just the state of Florida, but all the other 49 states in America, they're all then divided by counties. So as an example, in Florida, you can have Orange County, and within Orange County, you can have many different cities. So back to this post office, if we have all of these post offices within each city, they all have to feed up into what's called a distribution center within Florida. And that distribution center can sort out multiple letters coming in from multiple different counties. Now keep in mind, when these letters are being fed from a city perspective to that distribution center that holds multiple counties, and remember, there are multiple cities within each county, that distribution center has a list or a table of all of the different counties it is servicing. So you may have multiple distribution centers throughout the state of Florida. So as I describe your local post office all the way to your distribution center that is spread out through the state of Florida, the same thing happens in the other 49 states. Okay, so if I send a letter over from my city, which is in a certain county, as they're sorting the letters, they realize that, okay, based on the zip code, because again, we have a list of zip codes that we service at each level, at the local level where we put in our mailbox, it sees a zip code that is out in California and it says, well, we don't service this zip code here. So let's send it up now to our distribution. Our distribution should know where it goes from there. So then that letter travels out of our local post office and then it goes into the distribution center that services our county. And again, if we're in Orlando, it's going to be Orange County. and then it goes to the distribution center that services Orange County. Now here we are at the next level, which is the distribution centers that handle multiple counties. And again, there could be multiple distribution centers throughout the state of Florida. So again, in order to simplify this, we can have one single distribution center that services all of Florida, and it has all of the different counties going directly to this distribution center. Now, of course, that's not exactly what happens in the real world, but again, we're making this very simplistic, and we're going to shrink it down so that way we can see that. So now that my letter went from the local post office now to the distribution center for all of Florida, that distribution center sees the zip code and it says, hey, I don't have that zip code in my list of counties that I service. So now that means that I have to send that letter over to now what's called a national backbone, or it's a distribution center that services multiple other distribution centers within different states. So it goes up another level. And as an example, we can have a distribution center that covers the southeast of the United States. We can have another distribution center that handles the northeast of the United States. We can have a distribution center that handles the central portion of the United States. And then lastly, of course, we can have a distribution that handles the West Coast. And all of these distribution centers are tied together so they know about each other. So as an example, our Southeast distribution that handles multiple states in the Southeast, it is tied to our distribution center in the Northeast. It is tied to our distribution in the Central. And then of course, it is tied to our distribution center in the West Coast. And so that distribution center now knows that the zip code that we have is tied to the West Coast. So then it sends the letter over to the distribution center out into the West Coast. And then of course, the same process now happens in reverse. That distribution center that handles all of California, it has a list of all the regional distribution centers within California that can handle multiple counties. Or to simplify it, right, it knows exactly where that county is. And then it goes ahead and sends that letter over to that distribution center that is in the right county, followed then by sending the letter to the local post office that has access to that street address, and it's all based off of addressing. So that is a very oversimplified version of how a letter gets from all the way here in Florida, all the way out to Sam in California. And by the way, networking is no different. And again, in order to simplify this, we're gonna do the same idea and the same concept. So as I mentioned before, you have your letter that has the message. And again, this is the data that we're looking to send from one computer over to another computer. This data gets encapsulated in an envelope or envelope, however you want to say it. And so as I am encapsulating the data now, this is now what is called a packet. And then the packet has a header on it, or in the front of it, it gives you information of where this packet is going and who it came from. So my phone has some data that it needs to send out to California, and very similar to our analogy with the post office. My phone connects wirelessly to the router over here. The router has an IP table or a list of IPs in order to say, hey, we need to send data over to this device. So as soon as my phone sends the packet over to the router and it checks its table and it says, hey, I don't have this IP address here in my table, I need to send it up to the next router, and that is the regional router that is servicing all of Florida. Now again, there's more complexity to this, but we're just gonna make it simple. So now that packet is sitting at the regional level where it has all the IP addresses of all the devices, or should I say the devices below it, which is typically routers. It then checks its IP tables and says, hey, do we have the IP for this particular packet that we're trying to send over to California? And it quickly realizes that it doesn't have that IP address in its routing table. So the next thing that that router is going to do at the regional level is send it to the router at the national level. And again, back to our example that we had before, the router has access to IP tables and it says, hey, we have a router that's connected from the Northeast, we have a router that's connected from the Central, and we have a router that's connected from the West Coast. And based on its IP address, it understands that, hey, the router out in the West Coast is the one that should be able to handle the routing for this particular packet. So now that the router out in the West Coast gets that packet and it sees the IP address, based on its IP tables, it knows, hey, even though I'm servicing a lot of these states out in the West Coast, I have an IP now that is going over to California. So it will go ahead now and route that packet over to the router that is servicing all of California. And now it's at the regional router. Now that router at the regional level that services all of California, it then looks through its IP table and says, hey, where locally within the state of California is this IP address located? And of course, it looks up its IP in the IP table and it finds the correct IP in order to send that packet to the next level down or the next router. And then once the next router receives that at the local level, then the local router then takes a look at its IP table and says, oh, I have a device that's either connected wirelessly or connected via an Ethernet cable. Let me send over this packet over to this computer. And just like that, our packet was delivered all the way from Florida to California. Or in the case of the analogy with the post office, my letter to Sam was delivered from Florida all the way to California. Now, hopefully you guys followed me throughout the whole entire thing and hopefully it makes sense. And if there's any questions that you have on that analogy, leave me a comment in the comments below. Now guys, that was a lot to take in, I know, but trust me, watch the video over and over again in case you didn't understand anything. I guarantee you it will click. It took me a little bit to figure out how networking works, trust me. Now stay tuned to the channel, of course, because we got a lot of things that we're gonna dive into. Now, if this video has helped you out in understanding how networking works, go ahead and give me a like as it helps the channel grow. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications so that way you're notified whenever I upload new videos to the channel. And of course, share this with a family member or friend so that way they can learn how networking works. All right, guys, that was a lot to take in. So let's take a break from here. But as always, I love you. I appreciate you all. And I'll see everybody in the next one.